Hi, I'm Michael Holter. I want to show you how I paint an eye. When an eye is facing toward you and you can see it fully like this, it's in the light, it presents a very unique set of problems that we can work through, and I'll show you that in a minute. This is the way I would typically work with the face. The first thing I do is we tend to start off with some color. So I want this face to have some color on it. Now, I wouldn't do it quite like this if I was being careful, but I'm just trying to show you, first of all, the color isn't as important as value anyway, so you can put color on here and it can become an interesting painting. I'm just going for the eye right now, so I'm just trying to kill the white up there and show you how this eye is developed. Second step in my glaze phase is to cover the shadow areas. And I usually use the same color that I used before. And I apply that wherever there are shadows. Now this face has got shadows that are not real strong in some areas. And I'm not really worried about the rest of the face, but I'll show you how that would work. We'd put the shadow areas in over here. In this case, I'm using this same red. And it builds up later, right away in the beginning. People will say that's extremely red, and it will settle down. And so this whole side of the face is in shadow. Now, this other side of the face, where the light is hitting, there are some shadows that are happening right in here, along the top of the eye. Those are sort of shadow areas. I keep a paper towel handy to keep the moisture controlled. And there's a bit of a shadow right in here. And some other areas as well. I often take a damp brush and soften these edges. I'm going to take and put a little color onto the side of the face just to kill that white. And so you can kind of see where the edge of the face is. And I don't care what color that is. I'm really looking for the shape here at this time, at this stage. So you can see where that. So if we get close in on that eye, it'll start to make sense. All right. I'm really going to just focus on the eye here. First thing I do is put a base coat of paint down on the eyeball, on the iris and pupil. In this case here, I'm going to have a brownish eye. So I'm going to use quinacridone gold as an underpainting. That's going to set the tone for this eye. Looks a little strange right now. We'll let that just sit for a minute as we let it settle into the paper. And then I take a damp brush and I remove some of the paint. I start to lift off. If you look at the eye over here, it's much more the light's coming through her eye and giving some light into that eye. So I want to keep that light there. So I'm going to lift some of that off. And I don't care if I go up into the eyelid a little bit. It actually makes it kind of interesting. It brings some harmony and unity into that shape. So let me soften a little bit up in there. Once that's dry, I take a brown, a dark brown, something that I'm interested in using to create this brown eye. It could be anything. I'm going to use some quinacridone rust and some burnt sienna. from my palette here. A pretty strong mixture. Not quite direct from the tube, but close. And I'm going to put an edge around here on both sides where the iris has a darker outside edge. And I'm going to add a little bit into the pupil area just to kind of give me a sense of what the shape is and where I'm going with it. Once that is set just a little bit, I'll take a damp brush and I will go in here and just gradually manipulate a little bit of that edge, the inside edge of that dark ring that I've created there. Both sides. What that does, gives you that nice feeling of light coming through the eye that you can't get if you just paint it real directly. So, and then I began to use this as an opportunity to get a little creative. I'm looking at this eye, I'm looking at it and saying, what will make this eye interesting to me? There's this portion over here that's, I can use the same warm color that I used on the iris, because it is a nice warm color. It works right into the flesh tones. And bringing those things together can really work sometimes to your advantage. Now, I've got to make sure that I'm not leaving a lot of hard edge in a lot of areas that just sort of attract your attention that aren't important. So I use a little bit of damp brush again. And I'm looking more at this, at the eye itself, than I am over here at the photo. Although the photo is going to give me some ideas about where I might need to put some additional color. Here's a little, going back into that Scarlet Lake again that I had initially placed in here to make it a little darker. And there's a little bit of a reddish tone right into that part right there. It's still wet. I can put that right in there. And I don't like the way this little spot right here is working, so I lift that a little bit. Dry brush, or a damp brush I should say, and just lift out some of that pigment. And this part over here needs to have a little bit more clarity on this part of the eye. I'll put some darker pigment in there. This is a little ultramarine blue. This needs to go a little darker. Now this is all wet still, so it's going to bleed and move around a little bit. I'm going to take a little bit of neutral tint. Actually, I'm going to take a little bit of raw sienna first. Put a little raw sienna on this eyebrow up here, a couple of places. I'm going to take a little bit of neutral tint, which is a nice dark gray, and I'm going to just add this area right in here as part of her eyebrow. That looks kind of odd, so what we need to do is we need to manipulate that a little bit. That stroke, as Richard Schmidt would talk about, strokes have different sides to them. You don't necessarily leave a stroke of paint exactly the way you put it down. Sometimes it needs to be manipulated. It needs to be softened on one edge. You need a lost and found edge on a stroke sometimes. So here's where this happens. And what happens with that is you get the softness of it that is the same kind of feel as the hairs that make up the eyebrow. You don't need to do every part of it, but you need to do some parts of it. And you need to let these colors work together. It's a little bit of an abstract feature that we have going. And we can even add a little bit more color into it and put a little of that Scarlet Lake in there just to make it a little more interesting. One of the things that needs to happen is it needs to have a little bit of form to the eyeball. This eyeball is in the head, and you can see the shape of this eye because of the area around it. So in this sense here, I'm going to put a little cooler color around the outside edge of this, and then soften that. Make that into a curvature that gives you a sense of the spherical shape of the eye. I can also go back in to this corner down here and add a little more red, because there's some reds in there. The eye has some red in there. There are some dark areas along the bottom of the eye that are part of the shadows and the eyelashes that come along here. Put a little of that in there. Kind of frame the eye a little bit. I don't want to make every eyelash distinct. I want to just sort of indicate a value there, a darker area. And this is quite a bit darker right in here. I'm going to put a little violet on my brush in with this a little quinacridone violet mixed into the Scarlet Lake that I have, just to cool it down a little bit and make the value a little bit darker. Back to a little bit more of the Scarlet Lake. Need some values right in here. There's a little more value right in here. Even the cheek down here has a little bit more color to it, a little more value. All of these areas are very subtle, and this is very thin paint applied carefully. Almost all water at this point in these strokes. I'm going to bring some value in up there, a little more pigment, a little more value to give a little shape to that part of the head. And a little more value into this forehead area. And a little more down here. And of course, there's all these features of the nose and so on, but we're not going to get into that. The nature of the eye here has been carved out a bit, and the more we do it, the more color we put on it, the more value we add to it. We can either build up shapes and form, or we can begin to create ourselves some problems if we put too much in there. I like to treat the eye as a little bit of an abstraction, just look at the eye and the way it's working and enjoy what you're doing with it. Now, I think the shape of the eye has I've lost some of the shape that I wanted in here. And so that when the sun hits the eyelashes and the eyelid, there's a shadow that's cast, even if you can't see it exactly on every photo or every image or every time you look at somebody's eye. There's going to be some value cast over that eye, and that's going to cause there to be a little bit of a darker area there, typically. Pull this in there a little bit, make some unity of shape and form. soften that a little bit. So you may have noticed that there's quite a bit of a little catch light here on her eye. The sun is shining and giving that light, and it's very distinctive, and it really adds a lot to making an eye look like it comes to life and sparkle to it. Notice I didn't paint around that white, but I left it. So I've got a little blade here, and all I need to do to make that come alive is to take and pick with this blade back down to the white of the paper, and you end up with the catch light that you wanted in the first place. So that's an eye. Practice them, practice different colors, different ways of applying your paint to them, and I think you'll find that they really can come to life and add a lot to your people.